James Carter had never been one for idle chit-chat with neighbors or the artificial sense of camaraderie some people seemed to crave. He was a man who lived by doing, someone who'd spent decades crafting a life with his own hands. He'd started as a mechanic, wrenching on engines until he eventually owned his own auto repair shop. He was damn good at it too, so good that he had a roster of loyal customers who wouldn't trust anyone else with their vehicles. But the grind of running a business, managing employees, haggling with suppliers, soothing impatient clients, had worn him down. His knees creaked more than they used to, his fingers stiffened in the mornings, and sometimes he'd catch himself staring at a carburetor, lost in thought for minutes at a time. The signs had been there for years, subtle but persistent, and it wasn't until he nearly crushed his foot under a slipping engine block that he finally admitted it. Maybe it was time to ease up. So he sold the shop, pocketed the cash, and bought a modest house in a quiet corner of town where he could leave the chaos of the working world behind. It wasn't anything fancy. A single-story place with a garage big enough for 2 cars and plenty of room for his projects. That garage was the real draw. The second he stepped inside, he could picture it. Shelves stacked with tools, a solid workbench, maybe an old pickup waiting to be brought back to life. It was his sanctuary, a space where he could finally live on his own terms. The neighborhood itself was fine, mostly retirees like him, a few younger families sprinkled in. He didn't care about fitting in. He wasn't rude, but he had no interest in joining some cozy suburban clique. A wave back if someone waved first, a hand with a flat tire if he felt like it. That was as far as it went. He'd dealt with enough people and their baggage over the years. Now he just wanted peace. But then there was Linda. She showed up within days of him settling in, striding across his driveway while he hauled the last of his boxes from the truck. She was in her late 50s, clad in a flowery top and beige capris, her auburn hair styled with that meticulous suburban polish that instantly put James on edge. Her face held a look that wasn't quite a smile, more like she was sizing him up, deciding if he was worth her time. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, her voice a little too perky, standing a little too close. James gave a curt nod and a gruff, "Thanks," hoping that'd be the end of it. But Linda wasn't the type to back off. She lingered, arms folded, peering past him into the garage. "So, what do you do?" she asked, her tone casual but edged with something pushy. James sighed inwardly. He hated small talk, especially with nosy strangers, but he knew better than to snap. Used to run a repair shop. Sold it. Retired now. Linda's eyes lit up like she'd struck gold. "Oh, a mechanic. That's great. You must be handy. We could use someone like that around here." James tensed. He hadn't moved here to be the neighborhood fix-it guy. "I'm retired," he said again, letting the word hang heavy. She laughed, waving it off. Of course. But it's nice to help out. Neighborly, right?" He didn't reply, just shrugged and turned back to his boxes. She kept talking about block parties, rules, how things work around here, like she ran the place. James tuned her out, but that was his first red flag. Over the next few weeks, Linda became a fixture. She'd pop up at the edge of his driveway when he stepped outside, coincidentally stroll by while he unloaded groceries, or chat with other neighbors while sneaking glances his way. She wasn't blatant, yet, but James had dealt with enough people to spot someone probing for weak spots. He kept her at arm's length, giving her nothing to grab onto, but he could tell she didn't like being ignored. Things escalated the day of the cookout. It was a low-key thing, just a handful of old buddies, a grill fired up, some beers, and stories from the past. James hadn't invited the whole street, just the guys who knew him before all this, who didn't expect anything but a good time. The air smelled of charred burgers, smoke drifting lazily upward, and their laughter echoed as his friend Mike cracked a joke about their wilder days. For once, James felt at ease. This was what he'd wanted. Simple, no drama. Then he saw her. Linda was by her fence, pretending to fuss with her rose bushes, but her eyes were locked on them. On the grill, the food, him. She caught him looking and flashed a smile before heading over. James braced himself. "Well, looks like quite a party," she said, stopping just shy of his yard, her voice syrupy. "Guess I didn't make the guest list." He took a slow breath. "Just some old friends." Her smile didn't budge, but her gaze sharpened. "Oh, a private thing." He nodded. "Yeah." She stood there, waiting for him to crack, to invite her in. When he didn't, Her lips tightened. "Well," she said, too sweetly, "I guess not everyone's included around here." He didn't bite, just turned back to the grill. She left, but he knew it wasn't over. He was right. Soon after, sirens pierced the air, cutting through the relaxed vibe like a knife. Conversations died, and James's grip on the tongs tightened as he glanced toward the street. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees. His friends tensed, guys who'd seen enough trouble to know uninvited cops were bad news. James set his beer down, wiped his hands, and headed to the front. 2 patrol cars rolled up, engines humming, radios crackling. A stocky officer with a buzz cut stepped out, eyeing him. "Sir, we got a call about a fire hazard here. Uncontrolled burn, maybe spreading to other properties." James didn't need to guess who'd called. He flicked a look toward Linda's house. She was in her doorway, phone in hand, watching with a smug glint. "It's just a grill," he said, voice flat. "Standard cookout. No danger. See for yourself." The officer sighed. "Mind if we check?" James shrugged. "Go ahead." The cops poked around, inspecting the grill, the yard, the fence line. His friends watched, wary but quiet. After a few minutes, the officer nodded. "Looks fine. Sorry to bother you." James met his eyes. "Don't apologize. Just tell me who called." The cop hesitated. "A concerned neighbor." James's jaw ticked. Figures. As the officers headed back to their cars, Linda stepped out, all innocence. "Everything okay, officers?" she called, her tone dripping with fake worry. James didn't react. The cop shot back. "No fire, ma'am. Just a barbecue." She gasped, hand to her chest. "Oh, I must have misjudged. Thought I saw flames getting high. Better safe than sorry, right?" She glanced at James, daring him. The officer's jaw tightened. "Just be sure next time. False calls waste time." She feigned shock, but James saw the cop's irritation mirror his own. Linda smirked as they drove off. "Be more careful next time," she murmured, low enough for just him. "Wouldn't want misunderstandings." He didn't reply, but the chill in his gut told him this was only the beginning. The next time Linda called the cops, it wasn't about a grill, it was worse. James had always prided himself on staying cool under pressure. Years of handling irate customers and shady vendors had taught him to keep his head, pick his fights, and only push back when it mattered. But Linda was testing that restraint. After the cookout stunt, he'd hoped she'd gotten her kicks and would move on. No such luck. She thrived on control, and when he didn't play along, she doubled down. It started small, trash cans tipped over in the night, contents strewn across his driveway, no wind or critters to blame. Then footprints, too clean to be random, tracing from his drive to the side of his house. His cameras caught a shadow once, too quick to pin down. Then came the note, shoved in his mailbox, scribbled in harsh strokes on cheap paper. "You don't belong here." James stared at it, the words sinking in. This wasn't just petty anymore, it was personal. He could have gone to the cops, but they'd just file it and wait for more. Linda wanted a reaction, so he gave her none. Instead, he locked down his place. New cameras, motion sensors, reinforced locks. He wasn't about to be caught off guard. Then, one night, a crash jolted him awake, metal clanging, glass shattering. He grabbed a flashlight, moving silently through the house, senses sharp. Outside, his truck's windshield was smashed, glass glinting on the hood. A brick lay beside it, scrawled with "Consider this a warning." His fists clenched, a slow anger simmering. This wasn't random. He checked the footage, a figure, face obscured, but the walk, the build, it was Linda. He called the cops this time, handed over the video, and let them connect the dots. They said they'd look into it, but he knew she'd wriggle free unless they caught her red-handed. Then he found the photo. Tucked in a box he hadn't unpacked, edges worn, ink faded, a picture of his old shop. His gut twisted. 7 years back, a woman had sued him, claiming his work botched her brakes. He'd proven her wrong, case dismissed. That woman was Linda. She hadn't just moved here by chance, she'd tracked him. Revenge? Obsession? Whatever it was, she'd waited years for this. The cops wouldn't care about an old grudge, so James prepped harder. More cameras, an offline alarm, floodlights. He waited. 3 nights later, his phone buzzed, motion in the garage. There she was on the feed, no mask, prowling his space, hands grazing his tools. He recorded it, called the cops. They caught her mid-act, lights flashing as she spun lies about being invited. The footage shut her down. They cuffed her, and as she glared at him, spitting, "This isn't over," he stayed silent. She'd lost, for now. But Linda wasn't done. Released on bail, she sent a lackey that night, a man creeping along his fence. James flipped the floodlights, shotgun in hand, and the guy bolted. By afternoon, she was back, smirking from her porch. Then the cops showed up again, her complaint this time, claiming he harassed her, that his cameras spied on her. He showed them everything: vandalism, the break-in, her trespassing. They sighed. She's smart, playing the system. Stay clean, let her slip. James nodded, but waiting wasn't his style. She struck again at 3:14 a.m., smashing his back door's window. He found her in the yard, wild-eyed, clutching his missing wrench. "This was my place," she snarled. "You ruined it." Sirens neared. She'd triggered his alarm. Then she swung the wrench, not at him, but at her own face, collapsing with a scream. "He attacked me," she wailed as cops swarmed. They cuffed James, but he stayed calm. The cameras had it all. At the station, they grilled him, but the truth held. Released by morning, he watched them haul Linda in, her smugness gone. Charges against him dropped, a restraining order filed, and soon her house was for sale. She left without a word. James cracked a beer on his porch, finally at peace. It was over, for good.